causes very severe lameness very quickly that can spread between ewes and lambs. Look, this is not just an exclusively a lamb condition scald at this time of the year. It can spread to ewes and be present in ewes very easily as well. And a lot of the time where you have scald in lambs, you're going to have a good few cases of scald in your ewes as well. And look, at something that spreads through a flock very quickly. It's very easy to get more than one foot affected here as well.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. The scald can creep in the flocks quite quickly at this time of the year, catching many farmers off guard. In this episode, we're joined by Jake Delaney as we focus on staying ahead of the problem, tackling it early before it develops into more serious issues. Jake, in terms of lameness, I suppose one of the first issues we start to see in the season is scald, and we tend to maybe see it more in young lambs at this time of the year where grass growth is coming. Would you maybe just explain a little bit about what scald actually is and how it occurs?
Yeah, exactly, Kieran. So look, scald it's what we all know as the inflammation in between the toes. It's we see the redness, the kind of rawness that's there right down. It starts right down in between the base of the foot. What causes the bacteria that none of us can see, and it spreads from there. It gets in through an abrasion in the foot, something like if the ground underneath is wet or damp or whatever or mucky, gets in for that way through the kind of dampness there, and that causes an abrasion. Or even lush grass this time of the year, or even later in the summer, what we'll see is stemmy grass causing that little bit of abrasion. What that does is that lets in the bacteria, and it starts from there, and it causes that inflammation, that redness, that soreness. Sometimes you can see a bit of grey, yellow pus coming off that as well. So that's what scald is.
That's what I was just going to ask you, Jake. Typically, you normally associate this in your head with kind of late April, early May, that little bit of grass growth, and all of a sudden now we start to see a couple of lambs getting lame. What you're describing there is that microabrasion you discussed with me before. Is that picking up basically that little cut on the skin, is it?
Yeah, anything at all. So going right the way through the year, all it needs is a bit of moisture, and that can happen. So a bit of moisture coupled with an abrasion, and that can even it doesn't even have to be from grass. In one case there lately where there was some debris in a field, and that was enough to cause that abrasion in lambs and let in scald and start a scald cycle.
I suppose there are two aspects of this I want to discuss a bit more with you. One, and maybe first, just to kind of deal with it, whereas it's possibly not as big a challenge maybe as some of the later issues that we can see, it is quite painful.
Yeah, it's very painful, and it causes very severe lameness very quickly that can spread between ewes and lambs. Look, this is not just an exclusively a lamb condition scald at this time of the year. It can go to ewes, it can spread to ewes and be present in ewes very easily as well. And a lot of the time where you have scald in lambs, you're going to have a good few cases of scald in your ewes as well. And look, at something that spreads through a flock very quickly. It's very easy to get more than one foot affected here as well. So look, every lesion has an impact, and the longer this goes on, or the more feet that get affected, the worse it's going to be and the harder it's going to be to cure. And that's why it's so important to get in early when you see these first few scald cases and treat.
And obviously, look, that has an impact on performance, and we might come back to aspects of that as well. There's another element of this, Jake, that I want to discuss with you. You've done a lot of work in this area over the last couple of years. We talk about scald and we talk about the treatment after. It's the first step really on some of the foot issues we see. It's the fact that it leaves it open to other infections. It's probably something we didn't think about really before, put enough emphasis on before, that is a kind of a gateway to some other infections that are harder to treat and harder to clear up.
Yeah, exactly. So look, when we talk about lameness, look, the main causes of lameness look, over 90% of lameness, nearly 100% in Irish farms are the infectious lamenesses. So they're, look, scald, they're foot rot, and it's cod. So when we think about this stage of the year, more or less 100% of the lameness lesions, like foot rot and cod, that we're going to see on farms as we go right the way through the year, they're all starting as scald. So that's why it's so important to get on top of lameness right early in the year when it's at this early stage of scald. It's important to get on top of it so you can prevent that burden it's going to have all the way right down to the back end of the year. So by controlling scald now, and controlling when it's at its easiest stage to control, like when we're talking about foot rot and cod, they're far harder to get on top of and control. Scald is easier. So we can get on top of that now. We're setting ourselves up right for the whole way through the year. And at the end of the year, we're leaving more money in our pockets as well, because we're not having that performance impact that the other conditions are going to have. If we're getting on top of the scald early, we're minimizing the impact that's going to have on the lambs and the ewes. And then as well, we're saving ourselves treatment costs as well, because we're not going to end up having to go in with antibiotic treatments that are necessary to treat foot rot and cod. And we have we have conditions now that are like scald that are highly treatable with just foot baths or topical sprays, and are going to be easy to get on top of and prevent cases then going into the future.
Yeah, so you're hitting on some of the big things there. Like we're reducing the impact it can have on performance. We're reducing the vulnerability of those animals to get other infections. Maybe to an extent, Jake, we're reducing that environmental challenge for all the sheep on the farm in the coming weeks if we do get on top of it early.
Yeah, exactly. And when we start seeing the first few cases of scald, if it's in ewes or lambs, look, that bacteria that causes that's present on a lot more of the sheep than one just ones we're seeing that are visibly lame. So you're going to what you when you see the first few cases of scald, normally it's just there. It's only a matter of days before you start seeing a lot of cases because it's on the rest of the feet, that bacteria, and those lesions are starting to develop on other sheep. Just you can't see it, and that's the beauty about foot batting. So we think about, look, if that bacteria is spreading, the lesions that are starting to pick on other lambs and other ewes. If we go then and we're doing just individual treatments, we're not going to see these other sheep, and that's bacteria then that's going to spread. That's lesions that are going to spread because they're in the early stages, and it's often is the stage before we see actually any visual lameness, and we see the lameness itself. That's actually actively spreading already. Scald actually spreads its quickest before we see any lameness. The bacteria spreads quickest, it's replicating the quickest before we actually see any visible lameness. So that's why something like foot batting comes into play there. We can think about we have a group treatment. So one, we can treat those animals we see that are lame by foot batting them, and as well we're disinfecting the feet. We're killing that bacteria on other sheep that we see that are there, they're in the paddocks, in the same paddocks, in the same fields, because that's where it spreads, that aren't lame, but they're probably getting lame, or the bacteria is there that could cause them to get lame. So we're disinfecting that, we're killing all that bacteria, and we're getting rid of one, the burden on the in the paddocks or the fields or wherever, and as well we're easing the lameness burden then of those sheep that have it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point because we often talk, and many farmers out there will talk about topical treatment of individuals. They're showing it, whereas it might be applicable for the individual lamb. We're not thinking about the whole flock and the ones we can't see that might show up in a week, 2 week, 3 weeks time later.
Exactly, and even days. If you've treated the ones you see visibly lame, you'll find within a day or two again you're seeing more lambs with lesions. And look, a scald lesion takes about a week to develop, just over a week to develop. But that's often the time when you're seeing your first few lesions. They're the rest of them are well on their way to developing and presenting as a lameness case. So that's why it's so important to get in there like a batch foot bath or something like that. It is your group treatment, so you're getting them in there. You're getting in the sheep. When we're talking about zinc or copper sulfate, you're getting them in there for that proper standing time, and then they're getting the benefits of that disinfectant, and the bacteria is going to be killed, and you can release them then. Look, it's not a once-off thing. This is something that has to be repeated because lameness is the burden of lameness. That bacteria is going to be in pasture, is going to be between groups, and so it's very important that every time we're gathering sheep, because that's where lameness loves to spread, especially not just out in the field, but when sheep are in close confines to one another, that's where lameness spreads best. And so when we're gathering those sheep, we're putting ourselves at a risk to that lameness spreading. So it's very important that when that you're coupling tasks such as dosing or whatever, and you're coupling those with a foot batten, so that with the risk we've gone to through exposing the other sheep by gathering them to lameness, we're actually disinfecting that and having a treatment effect in some other sheep as well by putting them through a foot bath.
So I'm thinking there, Jake, and oftentimes these jobs end up being done on the weekend. If you're on the topical treatment route, your likelihood is you're going to have to come back in again next weekend to do it. Probably one of the reluctances, though, and we have to acknowledge this, and why up for topical treatment is it's not a very easy task with young lambs, the first trip into the foot bath. Generally speaking, if it's done once, it becomes easier. But if it'll take everything you've discussed here, it could be just worth spending the extra time, the extra effort to do that at the early stage, treat the whole flock, and to an extent, you're training the lambs in to get into the foot bath the next time around anyway.
No, it's not easy, and you had our own intro it last week. In their first go at a batch foot bath for the year, the lamb's first go for the year. So like it's not easy, but what I will say is when your own yos get used to the foot bath, if it's your first time, you've only just built a batch foot bath and you're thinking this is a nightmare, it's not that. It's just your first time, and once the yos get used to it, the lambs will travel through easier. But once you get that first time over and done with and get the lambs used to it, they will travel through quite easily after that. Look, there's nothing worse as well. We all know from trays in a race or something like that where there's a lot of splashing going on as well. They can be slow to travel through that as well, but it is a necessary task to do to save us hardship later on in the season, and right way through the season as well, and next even early in the year like this to save hassle from scald
Mm.
cases.
Yeah, look, it's like a lot of things that happen in the early part of the season. The foundations you lay now have a big impact for the rest of the year. So this is one of them other things. Look, maybe just bring that on another step. Like you've also done a lot of work looking on farms at footbath practice and general lameness control practice. If it'll maybe just take me through some of the common things you've seen on farm, some of the potential pitfalls that are out there, and just maybe some of the things we could maybe focus on this year to improve.
We'll take it. So when we're foot batting, there's well, really two types. We're talking about two methods. Like there's your batch foot bat, and then there's we'll say the trays or the races where there's a foot bat. So if we start on the batch foot bat, it's just really important to get that contact time, to get the standing time, and that's one of the most important things when you're using zinc or copper sulfate is that standing time. So we'd say a minimum of 15 minutes just to get that, just to get give the bacteria or give the solution, the zinc and the copper sulfate, a chance to disinfect and kill that bacteria that's in the hoof, and to penetrate into the hoof. So like that's what we say, a minimum of 15 minutes, and let it build on from there. The longer the better, ideally. But then once they're finished in the batch foot bath, that they have an opportunity to stand somewhere, a hard surface that can be gravel, it can be concrete, whatever, just as long as a hard, dry surface, to stand there for the solution to actually dry into the hoof and have its full effect. And so ideally, an hour standing time, but anything over half an hour, really, just to aim for that, just to let it dry in properly. Not to put them out into a field straight away, because that can lead to a lot of the solution that's on the hoof just being rubbed away.
Okay, so just it's another one of them things to consider. The footbath and the batch footbath long term, that is the way most should really consider going in terms of a lot of these control options. But one of the key things coming from what you're saying there is if we implement them kind of control measures early on, we have a great chance of reducing the burden for the yield.
Yeah, we have. And look, sorry, I forgot to mention about the trays and the race then, or the footbath that's based in a race. Look, when we're using that copper and zinc sulfate, we need the contact time, and that's why they're not ideal. Look, we don't recommend the use of formalin because it's carcinogenic. But just one of the biggest, what can be a pitfall of a tray in a race is just, look, it's that general splashing or whatever, that by the time a couple of ewes, or we've got through 50 or 60 ewes and their lambs, look, a lot of that solution is splashed out, and we end up not getting that contact time, or we end up getting a solution height. We talk about ideally 2 inches. We end up not getting that solution height, so the solution is not reaching to the top of the hoof. So we're not getting our full bang for a buck. We're not getting our proper disinfection there. Or as well, actually, for the races, what ewes can be inclined to do as well, or lambs even, is they can put their foot up on the side of the tray or whatever, and actually not put their foot down the solution at all. And again, actually, I'd nearly argue that's nearly harder to get lambs through a tray first time round than it is to get them in through a batch foot bath as well. But it's just, look, every farm is not set up for a batch foot bath, but I'd argue that it's something that's relatively easy and cheap to establish. But if you are in the situation that you are using trays in a race, just to bear that in mind and try to keep the solution topped up, try to gain as much standing time as you can, and just be careful about the sheep putting their feet on the side of the tray or whatever, if you can have smooth edges, and just make sure, because all you need is one foot that's diseased or has that bacteria on it to go out to the rest of the sheep then, and you're starting off the cycle of lameness again, and you're not giving yourself the full opportunity to prevent it as best you can.
And probably, Jake, one of the other added challenges to the trays is the real lame ones always tend to be at the tail end, particularly if it's Joe's and they're aware of what they're going to go through. So something certainly to be aware of.
Yeah, again, Kieran, something there as well, that batch foot bath is great, and the trays they're okay in a race when we're talking about foot bathing. But if you have a sheep there that's yielding, it's not putting its foot to the ground, there's no point in putting them through either a batch foot bath or a tray in the race. They need to be pulled off, and given either antibiotic treatment or a topical spray, depending on the condition they have, because that's they're not going to get any benefit out of foot bath.
No, an important point, certainly an important point. Look, Jake, good having you on. I think it's definitely one of those things we really have to be conscious of at the moment and act promptly when we see it.
Yeah, exactly, because at the end of the day, it's if we get control of it now, it's going to bring us in a good state right through to the back end of the year when our ewes are going to the rams, so it can set us up pretty well for the whole year.
Jake, appreciate that. No doubt I'll be chatting to you again before the season's out.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Jake for coming on once again, offering some very useful and practical advice on how we can tackle scald early in the season and why that's important. That's it for me. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.